Our second gospel reading comes from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 22, verses 34 to 40. It's on page 857 in your pew Bible if you'd like to follow along, but listen now to where the Spirit might be driving you in these verses. When the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together. And one of them, an expert in the law, asked him a question to test him. "Teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest?" He said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. And a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and all the prophets." Here ends the reading. Will you pray with me? Creative God of all that was and is and ever shall be, may these words I speak and all our meditations be pleasing in your sight, for you are our rock and ever our Redeemer. Amen. So the request came in late on Friday afternoon, and I almost didn't see it. I know this is ridiculously short notice, Rabbi Amy Small wrote. But on the chance that it might work out, I'm reaching out to invite you to join us for worship this Shabbat, even if only very briefly. It seems that a very small neo-Nazi group was trying to round up support this weekend from other small groups around the country for what they were calling a National Day of Hate, largely targeted at Jewish communities. Can you imagine even wanting to call anything that? That's a National Day of Hate. Now, there were no planned events in Vermont. Let me be clear that anyone knew of, but Rabbi Small guessed correctly that it would be important for the congregation to know that they were supported by the larger community and that they did not stand alone. And nothing came of it, of course. Nothing was ever supposed to come of it, and that's the point. Folks were supposed to simply be afraid and reminded that there were others out there daring enough to openly say they hated. That was the point. Now, Rabbi Small, reading from a letter by Yehuda Kurtzer, president of the Shalom Institute, recounted an episode from his childhood in the 90s in response to a local neo-Nazi group activity. Some in his community decided to fight back, and the local paper decided to sell the hype and ran a front-page picture of a kid from the Orthodox high school from behind, wearing a kippah and carrying a baseball bat threateningly on his shoulder. As it happens, Kurtzer continued, Danny was not a member of the militant Jewish Defense League. He was a kid on his way to play baseball, because sometimes a baseball bat is just a baseball bat. But for some of us, it's never allowed to be. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. My wife is very fond of reminding me that during the 2016 election, I shared one of the thousands of images that were later found to be created by Russian trolls. I cannot remember exactly what it was. It was not one of the fake rally posts that hoped to gather a group of leaderless and angry people together in the thought that they might cause trouble. It was not one of the Bernie coloring book posts. It was not one of the blue line American flags or veterans' rights posts. It was something seemingly innocuous about beauty standards for Black women. Not that long ago, the news was something that we experienced together, friends. The morning paper, the evening news, we always had it on from 5 to 6:30. We processed events, held them in the light together, for better or for worse, each through our own social location, of course, but it was filtered through the same Channel 3 news lens. Even as recently as 9/11, we huddled together around TVs to watch the news unfold, but the news cycle is constant now. I hardly even think it's fair to call it a cycle. It's more like a million scattered plot points, which sort of aggregate to sort of form a continually rising line. And to make sense of it, because the human brain is not meant to take in so much of the world at once, to make sense of it, you have to find your own plotted line through the chaos. You begin to listen to channels that make sense to you and filter the rest away. Now, this was the theory of Russian influence. Get us into camps. Not by changing our opinions, not even by inciting anyone to anything. Just getting you to care more about things you already care about. Getting us to care more deeply and more passionately about the things we already believe. Because the more passionately I am right, the more obvious it is that you are wrong. And it is obvious that there is wrong. Tyree Nichols, Trayvon Martin, George Floyd, the 300 plus people who are still dying each and every day in the US from COVID, the fractures in our health system for those who are older or compromised or living in trans bodies, the complete insufficiency of housing and our education system. In 2020, the wallpaper we'd used to cover the cracks, it peeled off. And the cracks deepened, and in some cases, the structure is collapsing down around us. And here we are 3 years later trying to pretend this is normal, but we don't even agree on what this is or what normal is. As the New York Times Magazine wrote this past week, because we were so isolated in our own experiences over that 3-year period, it's as though we've been staring into a funhouse mirror for a long time. And now our vision is correcting, but it's correcting imperfectly, so that we may not pick up on all the bulges and dents. We are awash in an onslaught of narrative repair, which are scattershot attempts to clarify or justify our bizarre experiences. The assignment of blame, misunderstanding, and misinformation flying in all directions. It will play out and reverberate for years or decades. The normal that American society is now scrambling to return to, the article continues, may be an even more irreconcilable array of normals than it was before. The pathological normal, the sociologist Ryan Hagan calls it. The pathological normal, a patchwork of homespun, bespoke realities, each one invested in a different story about what exactly happened when COVID ruptured the stories of our lives. The fracturing in the last 3 years has been so complete and the reentry so keyed into our own amped up narratives that virtually all of us are in some way or another exhausted, angry, and quite frankly spent. So when I asked the deacons in January what it was we wanted to do over Lent as a community, the answer was clear and immediate. How do I learn to trust again? What does that even mean? How do we pull our narratives back together again without erasing the complexity? Now, preaching on this same scripture, another colleague started their sermon by singing the 60s pop hit, "What the world needs now is love, sweet love." And they sang it a lot. I'm not going to do that. But Paul says love is God. Love is God. That is a radical thing. God can be many things, but all of them are done through an ethic of love. Paul continues by saying, those who say, I love God and still hate a brother or sister are liars. You simply cannot love God and hate God's image. We aren't talking about touchy-feely love. We are talking about an ethic, the moral of love, the love of respect and treatment. Now, the leaders here in our gospel reading were trying to trick Jesus because there was a lot of debate about which commandment was the most important, and Jesus easily quoted the first, but added the second. He refused to be limited to one. The second, actually from Leviticus, love your neighbor as yourself, because you cannot have one without the other. Now, here's the thing, even Jesus was tempted. While the particular temptations listed in our first gospel have specific scriptural reasons, they ought to seem familiar enough to be safe right? To be able to fall, jump, do what I want, when I want, and know there's a safety net. Temptation. To rule or to have others do exactly your things your way because you are right. And 3, to collect, to have what I need right now when I need it, no questions asked. Don't those sound familiar? To be safe, to have others acknowledge you are right, and to have what you need right now when you need it. Even Jesus was tempted away from this central ethic of love. But when asked to define his ministry, his answer was clear and simple. Clear and simple. Love one another. And he was great at this, finding all the lost and the excluded, the sick and the oppressed, and collecting them with compassion. And then he left that to us, the flesh on the bones of his ministry. But we don't always get it right. And over the past century, a lot of folks have looked at the church and said, if that's what love looks like, I don't think I want it, thanks. Now, as the Reverend Adam Hamilton puts it, the church thinks being right is the central ethic, but it's not. And as the narratives of our shared existence become more and more removed from one another, I think it's harder to avoid that way of thinking. When the opposite side's argument is a distilled, almost parody of itself. Anger and dismissiveness are far easier. They're natural. But if we want to know how to bring it back together, how to learn, how to trust, the answer is the same as it has ever been, friends. And it is as hard as it has ever been. Love as an ethic, love as proposed by Jesus, love as proposed by situation ethicist Joseph Fletcher, who said, if you are struggling to know what you should do, ask yourself, what is the most loving thing I can do? In any situation, it will be hard to go wrong if that is the question you answer with your life. Not love in a sweet feeling again, but love is in, I will see you, I will hear you, I will find a way to use my life, my resources to hear what you are saying and to bless you in this moment. I will see you, I will hear you, and I will use my life to bless you. That's it. That's the way Jesus saw the world getting changed. And it really wasn't that different then. He was living in an occupied zone, and the entire religious institution around which his life was based came crumbling down around him. There were threats on his life, clearly. There were people struggling and people starving, but he was determined to use his life as a blessing. I will see you, I will hear you, and I will bless you with my life. That's the point of this place, to look at the hate and the hurt and to use our lives to bless and to build. Now, over the next 6 weeks, we are going to look carefully at what this means. How do we live into an ethic of love? What situations do we need to put ourselves in for it to matter when we ask the question, what is the most loving thing to do? Are we in the places that matter? What is the role of forgiveness or reconciliation, the words we speak, and what of justice and judgment? And I would strongly encourage you to sign up for a discussion group, because thinking alone only gets you so far. You're going to head down the same camp road you've been heading down your life. It's in the doing and the together that we are changed. And friends, you are in good company. Now, I haven't been here at this church this long. We are approaching my 4th anniversary, Susan. Yeah, okay. But I personally benefited from the fact that First Church has historically tried to do this well. Because when the leaders at Ohavi Zedek wondered who to reach out to remind the congregation that they were not alone and they were not to be afraid, well, they reached out to me, which means they reached out to you. And I and the Reverend Sally May, who has been here in this pulpit before, we were able to stand in for all of the others, all of you who would have wanted to be supportive. Now, friends, we might not always get it right, as individuals, sharing memes, or as a congregation. But in this place, we are about trying. That's why we've had a partnership with Ohavi Zedek for almost 80 years now, and it's why near the end of the service yesterday, I had the privilege of watching a little boy come over to Carolyn, my 3-year-old daughter, and ask if it was okay if she wanted to go play, because a 2-hour service is a lot. And so they went into the social hall and they went running around, and I peeked out on them occasionally, and I found them near the end of the service on the social hall stage. And they had somehow gone into the back and brought out all of the toys, and they had 2 stuffed Torahs. And the little boy was standing on the stage, and he was holding a Torah, and Carolyn was standing behind him holding a Torah, and he was singing the Shema. Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, the central affirmation of Judaism and the holiest part of their holiest prayer, the prayer that summons all Jews to feel the all-consuming love of God, and Carolyn just behind him humming. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and love your neighbor as yourself. That is our project. Thanks be to God.